Welcome back to Top 10 Scary Urban Legends. Today is all about evil experiments that range from unethical human experimentation to grotesque animal testing. And they all serve as a reminder of the horrors that can occur when science is used for malevolent purposes. I'm your host Andrew, and here are your top 10 evil experiments performed by mad scientists. Number 10. Little Albert Experiment. In 1920, John Watson and Rosalie Rayner conducted a controversial experiment at Johns Hopkins University in an effort to prove the theory that people are born as blank slates that can be shaped through conditioning. The subject of their experiment was a 9-year-old baby, whom they nicknamed Albert B, and who was paid for by his mother, a wet nurse who worked at the hospital. The Little Albert experiment involved introducing the baby to a small furry white rat, which initially did not frighten him. However, the researchers then reintroduced the baby to the rat while making a loud noise, and repeated this process multiple times until the baby became frightened by the sight of any small furry animal, including rats, dogs, and monkeys, regardless of whether a sound was present. The identity of Albert B was not known until 2010, when it was revealed to be Douglas Merritt. Merritt was not a healthy subject for their experiment, as he showed signs of behavioral and neurological impairment as he got older. He also never learned to talk or even walk, and only lived to the age of 6. He also suffered from Syphilis, which is a condition in which there is an excess of fluid in the brain, and there's a possibility that he was intentionally infected with a bacterial meningitis infection as part of another experiment. And it is unknown if Merritt continued to fear small furry animals after the experiment due to his young age at the time of the death. The Little Albert experiment has been widely criticized for its ethical concerns, including the lack of informed consent and the potentially harmful effects on the subject. Number 9. Unit 731. Yup, this one is terrible. Unit 731 was a Japanese biological warfare research unit that operated in China during World War II. It was headquartered in a facility in Pingfang District, Harbin, China, and conducted experiments on human subjects to test the effectiveness of biological weapons and even study the effects of various diseases. The unit was established in 1936 and operated until the end of the war in 1945. It was led by Shiro Ishii, a Japanese army doctor, and was composed of several hundreds of scientists and medical professionals. The unit conducted a wide range of experiments on human subjects, including prisoners of war and civilians, often without their consent or even their knowledge. Some of the experiments conducted by Unit 731 included infecting subjects with diseases such as bubonic plague, cholera, and typhoid fever. They also studied the effects of frostbite by deliberately exposing subjects to extreme cold, and even performed vivisections, which are surgeries performed on live subjects without any anesthesia. Many of the subjects of these experiments died as a result, and the unit is believed to have killed thousands of people during its operations. After the war, many of the members of Unit 731 were granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for sharing the data they had collected with the United States. This decision was heavily criticized, as it allowed the perpetrators of these atrocities to evade any sort of accountability for their actions. In more recent years, the Chinese government has called for Japan to take responsibility for the actions of Unit 731, and even to provide compensation to the victims and their families. And it makes sense considering all the harmful things they did here. The Chinese government also called for the unit's activities to be recognized as war crimes, and for the perpetrators to be held accountable once and for all. Number 8. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study was a controlled but ethically questionable experiment conducted in the 1940s by the Department of Medicine at the University of Chicago in conjunction with the US Army and the State Department. The study was conducted on prisoners at Stateville Penitentiary in Illinois, and it aimed to test the effectiveness of various anti-malarial drugs on the relapses of malaria. The study is remembered for its lack of informed consent and major ethical concerns, as prisoners were just offered shortened sentences in exchange for participating in these experiments. The study was conducted at a time when there was an urgent need for the development of new malaria treatments due to the deployment of US soldiers to areas with high rates of malaria infection. The prison environment was conducive to controlled experimentation on human subjects, as the prisoners were of similar age, health, and behavior, and follow-up evaluations were possible due to their long-term sentences. The study was conducted on a floor of the prison hospital and involved infecting mosquitoes with a strain of malaria and then releasing them to bite the prisoners. The prisoners were given various anti-malarial drugs to see which one was the most effective in preventing the relapses of the disease. While the study may have contributed to the development of new treatments for malaria, malaria, it is remembered for its unethical practices way more and the lack of informed consent of the prisoners who were just downright treated terribly. Number 7. Project 4.1. Project 4.1 was a medical study and experimentation conducted by the United States on the residents of the Marshall Islands who were exposed to radioactive fallout from the Castle Bravo nuclear test at Bikini Atoll in 1950. The study, which was classified and kept secret from the public, was designed to evaluate the severity of radiation injuries to exposed individuals. As well, it was there to provide medical care and conduct scientific research on the effects of radiation on human beings. However, some Marshallese have claimed that the exposure was intentional and that they were used as guinea pigs because of their marginal status in the world. The Castle Bravo nuclear test, which was conducted on March 1st, 1954, had an unexpectedly large yield and spread dangerous levels of radiation over an inhabited area of 100 miles. In the wake of the test, the US government established Project 4.1, which was organized by Eugene P. Cronkite of the National Naval Medical Center. Cronkite's instructions emphasized the importance of secrecy surrounding the project, and for good reason. And also various organizations were involved, including the Naval Medical Research Institute and the Los Alamos National Laboratory. The primary study of the Marshallese was terminated after 75 days, but follow-up studies were conducted up to 1 year after the time of the exposure. Some of these studies were later written up as addendums to Project 4.1, while the US government and mainstream historical sources deny allegations that the exposure was intentional. The study has been the subject of controversy and criticism for its perceived lack of informed consent and major ethical concerns. Now it serves as a reminder of the potential dangers of nuclear testing and the need for caution in conducting research on human subjects. Number 6. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment was designed to observe the effects of syphilis when untreated. It was conducted in 1932 by the US Public Health Service with 600 African Americans recruited from Alabama. The men consisted of 399 with latent syphilis and 201 as a control group with no syphilis. They agreed to this study because they were promised free healthcare, in which they never got. And to make matters worse, they were even lied to, saying that they were being treated for bad blood. Now, these men were given only placebos such as aspirin and mineral supplements, rather than being treated with penicillin, which was recommended treatment at the time. Due to this, many participants of the study either died, went blind, got driven to insanity, or suffered severe health complications due to the untreated syphilis. The story ended up arising back in 1972, and by that time, 28 more participants perished, 100 more passed away from related issues, and 40 spouses were diagnosed with it. And the disease even got passed down to 19 children. Despite an apology by President Clinton in 1997, the damage have already been done. In the Humfer list, we have Burke and Hare murders. The Burke and Hare murders were a series of killings that took place in Edinburgh, Scotland in the 1820s. William Burke and William Hare were Irish immigrants who sold the bodies of their victims to anatomists and medical schools for dissection. The demand for cadavers for dissection was high due to the shortage of legal bodies available for study, and Burke and Hare saw an opportunity to profit from this demand. The two men killed at least 16 people, although the true number is believed to be even higher than that. The victims were primarily poor and vulnerable individuals, including beggars and sex workers, who were chosen because they were less likely to be missed or even investigated, which is just pretty sad. Burke and Hare were able to get away with their crimes for a time, but they were eventually caught and put on trial. Burke was found guilty and sentenced to death, while Hare turned state's evidence and was released. The Burke and Hare murders sparked outrage in Scotland and led to the passing of the Anatomy Act of 1832, which regulated the supply of cadavers for dissection and ended the illegal trade in bodies. Thank the Lord. Number 4. Guatemala Syphilis Experiments. The Guatemala inoculation experiments were a series of unethical and disturbing medical experiments conducted in Guatemala between 1946 and 1948 on around 1,500 people, including prisoners, soldiers, children, psychiatric patients. These individuals were enrolled in the experiments without their consent and were intentionally infected with sexually transmitted infections such as syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid through various methods, including sexual contact. The experiments were funded and even supported by the US National Institute of Health and the Pan American Sanitary Bureau. The primary motivation for the experiments in the first place was the US government's desire to reduce the incidence of sexually transmitted infections in the military, and also to find ways to treat and cure these diseases. However, the experiments were not just unethical, they were a gross violation of human rights and an affront to the dignity of the individuals involved. The Guatemala inoculation experiments served as a cautionary tale reminding us of the dangers of allowing scientific knowledge and national security to justify unethical actions. And to make matters worse, the experiments were not made public until they were accidentally discovered in 2010, more than 60 years after they were conducted. Number 3, the monster study. The monster study was a psychological experiment conducted in 1939 by Wendell Johnson, who is a psychologist at the University of Iowa. The study was conducted on a group of 22 orphan children in Davenport, Iowa, and was aimed to test Johnson's belief that stuttering was a learned behavior caused by external factors such as criticism from parents for speech imperfections. To conduct the experiment, Johnson and his partner divided the children into 4 groups. Half of the stutterers and half of the non-stutterers received positive or negative feedback. The children who were falsely labeled as stutterers experienced severe consequences as a result of the experiment. 5 of them developed speech problems, had their schoolwork negatively affected, and suffered from a lack of self-esteem that persisted throughout their adult lives. The experiment was not published but became a national news story in the US due to an investigative reporter, and was widely criticized for its lack of ethics and the harm it caused to these children. The University of Iowa even issued a public apology and provided compensation to 6 of the children in 2007. But the damage caused by the experiment cannot be undone. The monster study serves as a reminder of the importance of ethical guidelines in conducting research on human beings. And it also highlighted the lasting impact that psychological trauma can have on individuals, particularly when it occurs at a young age. Number 2, United States secret chemical warfare experiments. A researcher has made shocking claims about top secret experiments conducted by the US military on the citizens of St. Louis, Missouri. Professor Lisa Martino-Taylor, a sociologist at St. Louis Community College, has uncovered evidence suggesting that the government sprayed the general population with a compound containing radioactive particles, predominantly in low-income and minority communities without their knowledge or consent. The spraying, which took place from 1953, 1954, and 1963 to 1965, was done under the disguise of testing smoke screens to protect cities from a Russian attack. However, Professor Martino-Taylor has discovered hundreds of pages of declassified documents and even photographs detailing the extent of the experiment. The professor said, quote, "This was a violation of all medical ethics, all international codes, and the military's own policy at the time. There's a lot of evidence that shows people in St. Louis and the city in general were used as guinea pigs." Number 1, Radiation Man. This is the story of a man who was kept alive for 83 days just so doctors could see the effects of radiation and how long a human could last. In 1999, 3 technicians at a nuclear power plant in Japan were involved in a catastrophic accident that left one of them, Hisashi Uchi, with the highest dose of radiation any human has ever experienced. Uchi, along with his 2 co-workers, were working at the plant when a nuclear reaction occurred. This emitted neutron radiation and gamma rays all over the place. Uchi received a devastating 17 sieverts of radiation, while his other partners received fatal doses of 10 and 3 sieverts, respectively. The efforts of the radiation on Uchi were immediate and severe, causing burns and completely damaging his internal organs and immune system. Despite being treated by a team of top medical professionals from around the world, Uchi's condition continued to deteriorate. He underwent numerous skin transplants and was kept alive through the use of blood and fluids, drugs, and even life support. Tragically, on the 59th day of treatment, Uchi's heart stopped 3 times in just 49 minutes, causing severe damage to his brain and his kidneys. He eventually passed away on December 21st, 1999 due to multi-organ failure, spending the last 83 days of his life in intense pain and suffering just because they kept him alive. Uchi's case remains one of the most severe instances of nuclear radiation poisoning in medical history. Well, these are the top 10 evil experiments performed by mad scientists. What do you guys think about this list? Leave a comment down below with your thoughts and some suggestions for future videos. I'm your host Andrew, and don't forget to like and subscribe to this video for some more content, but I hope you guys have a scary day.